I am grateful that the State University of Humanities, Moscow, and the Department of Foreign Languages and Department of Marathi of Shivaji University had jointly asked me to come and share my thoughts on the theme of this very important exchange of views. For me, this is a kind of a homecoming because I studied in this university, Shivaji University, both for my graduation and later for research, for my research degree. So I'm not just grateful and not just that I feel honored, but I also feel delighted to be with you this morning. Thinking of South Asia, it has always struck me that if one asks an American if she is an American, the answer is yes. Or a Western European, if she or he is a Western European, the answer is European, the answer is yes. But ask someone from Nepal or Sri Lanka, or Afghanistan or India, or Bhutan, or Maldives, and the answer would be in terms of the national identity rather than South Asian identity. The South Asian identity is probably an identity which is tacit identity for us. It appears for us in the works of social scientists and historians. It appears for us in the works of political analysts or policymakers or international agencies, but it is not a part of our everyday thought and awareness. And in that sense, this peculiar identity opens up many new vistas of thought and action for people who are in South Asia. We, the people of South Asia. I use the term people. Let me quickly reflect on where we are and how many of us are there. In the global population of roughly 7.9 billion, maybe 800 crores, the South Asian population at the moment is 1.9 billion, roughly 190 crores. And thus about 24 to 25% of the entire human population. That's in very simple words, a quarter of humanity resides in this area, resides within this somewhat uncertain cover of this identity. The land that we occupy, however, is not a quarter of the land surface on this earth, and it is just about 3.5%. That is to say, we are all packed in a very small land area. And as of today, the population figures are the very highest in the entire known history of the Homo sapien. The history of the Homo sapien itself extends a long way back in prehistory, in remote times. People out of Africa moving from there 70,000 years ago is a very, very distant time for our memory to conceptualize properly. But let me say this, at least over the last 12,000 years, from the time the environmental age described as the Holocene began, we have been around, we have been here. The South Asians have been in South Asia for the last 12,000 years. Though they did not populate the entire area in the initial stage of Holocene, though in the earliest part they were more in the south of South Asia, Sri Lanka and South India, and the Andamans, and not so much in the north of South Asia. They were still there, at least some in the Gangetic Plains, and certainly a lot many more in what is now known as Afghanistan. So over these 12,000 years, South Asia has imbibed a number of influences. Professor Romila Thapar reminded us that the civilizational traits change every few hundred years. Cultures do not remain morphed and steady like some, some food matter kept in deep refrigeration. So we have imbibed cultural parts of the world. As far as the limited area of South Asia is concerned, we have had cultural relations with very intimate cultural relations with West Asia. And that is probably the most obvious to say on my part. But we had cultural and civilizational links with Armenia, with Turkey, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and in the north with places that are now known as Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and of course Mongolia. And China, though removed somewhat because of the geographical barrier of the Himalayas, has been an intimate relative of the South Asian culture. In recent times, during the last 500 years, since the onset of colonialism, this part of the world has imbibed cultural traits and forms of knowledge and norms of organizing societies from some of the European countries, England, France, and Portugal, and many more. Therefore, South Asia is a kind of a museum of humanity, densely populated in a relatively very small area of the earth. And because the population is so large, and because the climate is on our side in case the earth becomes too cold for us to survive, there is a great deal of responsibility on thinkers and planners in South Asia, responsibility to ensure that we establish at least some minimum standards of civilized society. If we turn to the present day South Asia and look at the standards of civilized society, we might be in for some kind of depression. There is, for instance, the Human Freedom Index, which places countries like New Zealand and Switzerland at on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 to 10. New Zealand and Switzerland at 9.27, 9.24 at the very highest end of civilized people. We in India are marked at 6.37 with lot of improvement possible for us. Nepal is our close next at 6. Sri Lanka is at 6.25. Nepal is slightly higher than India at 6.53. Pakistan at 5.47. The worst on that scale in South Asia is Myanmar at 5.26. Now, this Human Freedom Index has split the idea of freedom in terms of personal freedoms, economic freedom, and human freedom. And on all three, we seem to be floundering in South Asia at the moment. For instance, India is in personal freedom at 6.37, as I mentioned, in economic freedom at 6.91, and human freedom 6.64. These freedoms denied to people in South Asia reflect on the nature of governance, governments, political systems, and performance of democracies, performance of the political formations in these countries. It is good for us to know and reflect on and probably find some ways for going forward after that reflection. Good for us to know that the Freedom Index of 2021 has declared that Afghanistan has authoritarian regime. Now, this is no news for us, but it means that freedom is denied to citizens. Bangladesh is put as hybrid regime. Bhutan too, despite its high place in happiness index, is put in freedom index as a hybrid regime. India is a flawed democracy. Nepal, again, is a hybrid regime. Pakistan, similarly, is the same hybrid. And Sri Lanka is a flawed democracy. So in this entire region of South Asia, two countries seem to have democracies yet not dead, but not fully alive. And in other several and a few of the other countries, it is the military and the civil government put together, making it a hybrid regime. And in one country, it is clearly a non-civil government. So for such a large number of humans in South Asia, who form 1/4 of humanity, this is not such a good news in the 21st century. In another index on democracy of just a year ago, Bhutan is shown as deficient democracy, Maldives as deficient democracy, Nepal as deficient democracy, Sri Lanka as deficient democracy, and Afghanistan as theological autocracy. India is an interesting story, and me being an Indian, I may offer some further comments on that. Let us assume that the South Asians have been more inclined towards the other world and therefore relatively less interested in forms of governments that they have. I do not subscribe to this argument, but this is an argument that let's look at if the citizens have other things available to them, non-political things. For instance, do women have a chance of living an unthreatened life? What is the gender and health status in the country? And friends, the news for us in South Asia is not too great. In a ranking of about 198 countries, Sri Lanka is put at number 90, Bhutan at 99, Nepal at 110, India at 123, and Pakistan at 135, 35th place. This is where the women in this subcontinent stand today. They are facing if I may say so, a relatively subhuman experience of existence. The highest, of course, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, North European countries. I'm ready to buy the argument that all these assessments are by international agencies funded by European countries, and therefore the outcome may not be favorable for us. But then there are certain outcomes in other assessments which cannot be easily questioned because they are purely quantitative and not qualitative, such as the top 3 emitters of carbon in the world stands India, next to China and the United States. That is, on the one hand, we have political restrictions and decline of democracy and lack of freedoms of all kinds. On the other side, we're pushing the South Asia on a road of development, which will take us closer to ecological disasters. Already, scientists have declared that humans are about to cross, or they already crossed the tipping points. And from Holocene, we already entered Anthropocene, or we may shortly enter Anthropocene. On such a date, at such a timeline, if South Asia has defined development in terms of what development is for the others, development in terms of the development as was defined by a Russian astronaut on scale 1, scale 2, scale 3, scale 4, where existence for humans was imagined in the future as interplanetary existence. Please think of what would happen to the large numbers in South Asia who do not have means enough to meet the day's expenses for themselves. South Asia accepted agriculture as a method of food production and a mode of livelihood. Almost 8, probably 9,000 years before our time. Today, that oldest occupation of humans in South Asia stands utterly threatened and devastated. In terms of the percentage of the GDP that agriculture in a country forms, a global ranking shows that Afghanistan alone probably is still close to its agriculture as in the past in a good way. Whereas India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, they're all gone past that age. They crossed the line to which return to a healthy agriculture is possible. It is no longer going to be possible in future for either Maldives or Sri Lanka, either Bangladesh or India, to return to agriculture as a viable mode of existence for people. And these are people who are pushed into a frightening divide between the very rich and the very poor. These are the people whose access to education is statistically satisfactory at the lowest end, but as a child moves from first standard in school entry, to the middle school, high school, collegiate education, the participation of people in that process drops down. And add to it the injustice invited by caste discrimination and the caste and tribe discrimination, and gender discrimination and the urban-rural divide. And one can imagine how terribly oppressed the South Asian people today are for want of proper education, having lost their agriculture, having moved to urban places, having formed completely chaotic urban centers for their living. They seem to be floundering. They seem to be free floating. They seem to be moving from a respectable status, citizenry status, to a condition of pauperization which has no parallels in human history in terms of number, extent, forms of this pauperization and this free floating in a society without hope. Friends, you might say that I have depicted a very dark picture of South Asia. My intention is not to bring depression in your minds. My intention is to say that we need to rethink South Asia for ourselves with a greater clarity. Because the way we have conceptualized South Asia till now, till today, is through twin lenses. One, the lens of colonialism and theory that colonialism generated. The lens that the social scientists and historians and political thinkers of the Western academy look at us as South Asian, look at South Asia as an area or a region. The second is the perspective of the defense strategies, particularly in particularly in the post-Cold War period, where South Asia is defined in terms of military utility. But let us turn to ourselves through a perspective which we create, a perspective that we can create or have created, a perspective of our perspective emerging from our understanding of our cultures. And these cultures have been a mix, as I said earlier, and as Professor Romila Thapar so capably, so effectively told us, a mix of many cultures, which brought to us the virtue of tolerance, the ability to enter into dialogue, the ability to shape new languages and also preserve old languages. I will turn to the language question because not just because we have many languages in South Asia, but because the global context shows a very amazing phenomenon in terms of language with respect to South Asia. The phenomenon is that the languages all over the world are dying very, very rapidly. There are estimates that out of almost 7,000 living languages, about 4,000 languages may disappear in the next 30 years, maybe 40 years. In Europe, they studied 78 languages spoken in Europe and declared that many of them are already digitally dead. So in this era of dying languages, South Asia appears to have kept its languages still intact and alive. This peculiar phenomenon will help us in defining who we are and how we can go forward towards a better civilizational framework for ourselves and for the rest of the world. The languages disappearing in the world has not left India untouched. In India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Bhutan, in Pakistan and Afghanistan too, languages have disappeared. But the rate of disappearance is relatively less. This yet needs to be fully understood, but this can be observed at least at this stage. However, the states in these nations have not been helping languages to survive. Let me explain this. In the census of 1961, India had listed 1,652 mother tongues. In a census carried out a little later, Nepal had put the figure at somewhere close to 128. Some 10 years later, in India, this figure was brought down from 1,652 to 108. The government decided not to declare the names of languages that are spoken by less than 10,000 persons. In Bangladesh, 1971 census in India was affected because the data came out 6-7 years later. In Bangladesh, the nation was created on the basis of a language movement going back to 1952. Just as Indian states, the sub-regions in India, have their root in language movements in Telangana and Punjab and Maharashtra, all of the making of 1950s. The Bangladesh movement in 1952 culminated in the 1970s, getting East Pakistan turned into Bangladesh. And that was a triumph of the will of the people. Yet, Bangladesh has other languages other than Bangla. If you look at the census of Bangladesh, you will see a declaration that 98% of people in Bangladesh speak Bangla. But there is no mention of the Karains. There is no mention of the Lepchas. Recently, when in India we had the anti-CAA agitation, the Citizenship Act agitation against that act, it was focused mainly on the Bangladeshis migrating into India. And there the Indian law, the Indian Act, had named certain communities, Parsi, Jain, Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists, notoriously dropping the name Muslims. But to my mind, there was an even greater injustice in remaining silent about 12 tribal communities that have been perennially migrating between India and what is now India and what is now Bangladesh. Given the vagaries of Brahmaputra and its known habit of changing course, these communities such as Bru and Brus and Mroz and several others, their names are kept quiet in Bangladesh. Their names are kept quiet in India, and their names were kept quiet even among those who agitated against the CAA. This conspiracy of imposing silence on languages in India, while languages themselves exist, they continue. But a kind of an aphasia is being imposed by the state and by the people who complicit with the state. And that is frightening. Let me give an example from India. The largest language, largest in terms of speakers of that language in entire South Asia appears to be Hindi. In 2011, the census of India showed the number of Hindi speakers at 52 crores. But these 52, that's about 500 million, a little over 500 million. These 52 crores subsumed all other language speakers in Himachal Pradesh, all other language speakers in Uttarakhand, So the Kumaunis, the Gadwalis were shown as part of Hindi speakers. The Pahadi speakers, the Kulavis, the Laholis, the Spitians were shown as Hindi speakers. This figure of 52 crores subsumed in it speakers of all languages in Chhattisgarh and from southern Madhya Pradesh, and some even from Maharashtra. For instance, the Pauras of Maharashtra who speak the Pauri language will find the name of their language as part of subset of Hindi. And of course, from Bihar, the Bhojpuri, which was claimed as mother tongue by 5 crore 3 lakh Indians. And that's a large number. 5 crore is almost like the population of a nation. Out of 200 nations in the world, there would be at least 80 or 90 nations whose entire population is less than 5 crores. 5 crores of, that is 50 million Indians claimed Bhojpuri as their mother tongue. And this language has in it cinema, music, theater, literature, printing, newspapers, and a history of that language. And yet, that was put under the rubric of Hindi by the Census of India. If I go to the story of the enumeration of languages in Afghanistan, or in Pakistan, or in Sri Lanka, it is the very identical story. This is not a special achievement of India. It is a folly, a disastrous folly that we see in the entire South Asian region. And the name of this folly is to silence people in the name of development. Now, this desire to silence, desire to impose aphasia also gets manifested in many other areas. For instance, in South Asia, the level of caste oppression, there are no global indices of caste oppression because caste is not exactly a global phenomenon. It is peculiarly South Asian phenomenon. South Asian entity probably could be defined in terms of caste maintaining nations. The suppression of the caste in South Asia has reached a scale, the caste related suppression has reached a scale that is unprecedented. Mob lynchings, harassment, assaults on entirely innocent individuals who are at no fault are seen in all of these countries. They are seen in one country more at one time, in another country at another time. But no country of this region is an exception to the suppression of citizens. The worst of all who suffer are the women. If we have brought South Asia to this stage, we need to think very carefully about South Asia, not just in terms of what is the GDP, how many trillions of dollars our economies have come up to, not in terms of the number of universities that we establish. In any case, none of our South Asian countries figure in the first 40 at the in terms of educational infrastructure globally. But humans matter. And in order to keep humans at a minimum level of humanity, a political order matters. If we have entered an era of competitive authoritarian rules, if we are entered in an era of damaged and dented democracies, we need to stop, ask ourselves a question. And the question is, what is it that we need to do in order to restore democracies, in order to bring justice to women, in order to bring voice to silence languages, in order to reduce the tremendous disparity, economic disparity, in order to bring dignity to the livelihood, the occupations that people have followed for thousands of years, several millennia. These questions we need to ask. Since I am speaking at a seminar organized by the Shivaji University, it is very natural for me to think of the great Shivaji Maharaj. In a letter written to Aurangzeb in the year 1657, that is roughly 375 years back, Shivaji Maharaj writes to Aurangzeb that I detest the tax that you levied on people. Please think of your forefathers, Akbar, as Jagat Guru, revered by the entire world, the teacher of the preceptor of the entire world as known in his days. Because it is Shivaji Maharaj who uses the term Jagat Guru for Akbar. Shivaji writes that it is because he cared for all religions. With Aurangzeb, Shivaji says, you are not interested in any religion, just interested in collecting jizya tax. For our times, this could also be Shivaji Maharaj's later dispatch, the great King Shivaji's dispatch for the 21st century India and South Asia. We are today imposing a strife on our people in the name of religion, ethnicity, language. Whereas what we need is really to move to a greater democracy. And democracy would mean thinking of the demos, thinking of what makes people citizens, what kind of pact there is between citizens and the state. We need to rethink all of that again for our time in all the countries in South Asia. We need to rethink as to why our ancestors were capable of a social harmony despite having so many differences, whether they followed a Nyaya school of philosophy or a Vaisesika, or whether they were Jains or Buddhists, or they were atheists, or they were Islam, or they were Islam, they followed Islam, or they were Parsis, whether they worship fire or water or trees, or just sheer rocks, believing that rocks have life, which is a fantastic thought. But why is it that people could tolerate each other? And why is it that we lost that virtue of tolerance? We need to rethink again as to the need for economic parity. Because South Asia is the producer, the land, the water, the mountain, the tree, the animal of South Asia is our resource for survival as Homo sapiens. And we cannot grab all of it just for oneself, leaving nothing for the others. Even though we did not have revolutions in our part of the world, we need to invite, accentuate, and bring about an economic revolution in this part of the world. And of course, we need a greater access to health and education for all in our part of the world. I'm sure during the deliberations in this important symposium, seminar, many learned speakers will speak about these issues. And I'm sure as a result of all those statements and result of the book coming out of it, the policymakers, the politicians, and the people and the prophets of many religions will start rethinking about the future of South Asia. South Asia is made of many cultures in the past. South Asia today is on a very unsteady footing and on a very fragile political, ecological arrangement. But South Asia future is going to be extremely important for humans in times when the climate will change radically and when technology and artificial memory will have started threatening human autonomy beyond a point of mere concern, and very substantially, South Asians with their cultural heritage, with their religious depth, with their philosophical achievements, can come handy for taking humanity to safe shores in future. Thank you very much.